Matt, I was interested in your article, which was one of the first articles I read that you had written, or papers. You called it Space, the Final Economic Frontier. And I liked the framework you laid out for understanding the space economy. And you talked about, number one, you establish the market through decentralization. Number two, refine the market through policy. And three, temper the market through regulation. Could you talk a little bit more about the framework and what those three ideas really come down to, what they mean in a modern context?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Frank. Happy to talk about this. And this is where, the economist in me will come out. And if any of your listeners are economists or remember their economics training, they'll recognize the basic idea. It really stems from the way that economists understand why the market is so powerful, but also why the state is such an important actor, which is that under certain conditions, the market is an unparalleled force for efficiency and innovation and growth. And economists have fancy ways of talking about that and proving that mathematically, et cetera, but it really goes all the way back at least to Adam Smith and even further in terms of the invisible hand and terms that'll be familiar to your listeners. And that's really the first step in that three-part framework, which is the space industry for its first 40, 50 years was the opposite of a sort of free market. There was a lot of centralization, a lot of government control, not for bad reasons. I mean, we can walk through exactly why that was perhaps even necessary, but certainly desirable. But what we started to see is the decentralization of the space sector and the bringing in of market forces. And if we're trying to build a space economy, that's going to have huge benefits. And so that's the first part. Let's decentralize the system and let the market work some of its magic. The next two parts are really about the fact that markets aren't perfect, that they often fail in various ways. And so the first part about refining the market says that sometimes markets are just inefficient. They actually leave money on the table for various reasons that we can go into if you want, but we certainly go into in the article. And so the government can help by helping the sector capture complementarities or avoid negative spillovers and things like that. And then the third part is that even if markets are efficient, sometimes they give us outcomes that we don't like very much, just because markets are amoral and make decisions that we might disagree with. And so we might want to regulate the market or temper the market in ways that are consistent with our social priorities.
And that article came out in 2018 in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. Do you think it holds up today? Do you still use it?
Yeah, thanks. Right. You asked also, how is it relevant today? I mean, I will say I think part of the beauty of economics, and something I've learned a lot actually by trying to extend my economics lens to a totally new place, namely the space sector, is that economics is, or at least economics key ideas are universal and timeless. So space is a sector, space is a whatever, but in some ways space is just another place. And economics works in space just like it does everywhere else. And it works today just like it did in 1776 when Smith was writing. So I think the framework certainly holds up, and we've used it a lot, Brendan and I, in designing the course that we teach now at HBS on the space sector, sort of thinking about how to make it an intellectually coherent course that takes students through key questions in space. And I have to say, this is probably just a mark of my many years thinking like an economist, but when people ask me about space questions, my mind immediately goes to essentially this framework and how can I use that to help think through the question they're asking.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a conference I went to at MIT down the road from you. And one of the speakers said, if you really want to understand the space business, drop the word space.
Yeah.
And he was making a similar point. Brendan, you kind of chuckled when I asked if it was still relevant. What came to mind for you about the framework?
Yeah, I was laughing because we were using it this morning to think about the context of a case study that we're writing now. So I'm glad that Matt came up with that framework because it's been extremely helpful.
Yeah, well, it's good. And I agree with you. My thing is communications, and I'm using frameworks that I learned 20, 30 years ago, honestly, because even though the technology changes dramatically, and it certainly has in my field, I can still use certain concepts that do hold up.